Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Rose Llanos. Thank you all for being here today. We're so excited because we actually have a special treat directly from NACAC, our former, but almost former, David Hawkins, our CEO of Education Policy, who I've worked with and dearly appreciate and so thankful for all of his work that he's done. So he is stepping in today for Sean Robbins, our new Director of Advocacy. And he's going to share a little bit more about updates. I do have a quick little presentation here that I'm just going to share. So we have updates as far as what we're doing. Go ahead. So we're going to discuss a little bit more about areas and impacts within legislation, advocacy efforts from not only NACAC, but from a SACAC perspective as well. And Sean will give us some updates today to discuss more at the capital level, but as far as how our professions are being affected. So with that, we'll discuss at the end some of the ways you can get involved within your member association, within our 9 Southern Association states. And I'm here with as well Anna, who I see is on our webinar. Anna, say hi to everyone. She's our co-director for our states.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks so much for joining today. So we're so ecstatic to have Sean and just give us updates on the NACAC perspective, how we can get involved, different legislative updates. As we know, there's so many changes going on, and answering questions from you all. We know we've gotten some questions, so feel free to use the chat option there if you want to have your questions addressed at the end. But without further ado, we'll go ahead and turn it over to David.
Thank you so much, Rose, and thank you all for your interest in advocacy, your engagement in advocacy. I am David Hawkins, and I am substituting today for Sean Robbins. Sean sends his apologies that he was not able to be here today. He is not feeling well, so I'm glad that I was available to come and step in. This is one of the things I really enjoy doing, and I'll really miss when I'm no longer with NACAC. For those of you who don't know, I'll be leaving at the end of the year. But I will not go too far. I will still be hanging around this world in case I can be of help. So happy to share some of what's happening. I think probably, Rose, my first note, I guess, before I even start into the substance is just that at any time, if there are questions, please just flag me down, wave your hands, whatever you need to do to break in. I'm happy to expand on any of this to the extent that I can, with the caveat that Sean has been immersed in this world in a way that has fortunately allowed me to tend to some of the other things that I also do here at NACAC. So there may be things that we have to get back to you on if I can't answer them. But I definitely want this to be a conversation as we go along. So the first item that I wanted to talk about is that as we think about what's going on here in Washington, particularly, the elections yesterday are going to, I think, exercise a pretty important influence on things moving forward. So everything that I described for you today that has already happened will have to proceed in an environment where I think if you're a Republican operative in Washington, D.C. right now, I don't think there's any way you can interpret yesterday's off-year election results as an affirmation of any sort of the policies that have been playing out here over the last 10 months or so. Just briefly, I'm sure you've all seen the news, the gubernatorial and statewide victories for the Democrats in New Jersey and Virginia, the first ever socialist mayor of New York City, the ballot initiative in California on redistricting passed, and there were lots of other very sort of small, not small, obscure races, I guess, from a national perspective that tended to break the Democrats' way. So, I think it's pretty safe to say that the policies of the administration were probably the primary reason for the backlash that seems to have been yesterday's elections. So the thing probably that surprised me the most yesterday, or maybe, yeah, I guess it was a surprise. I kind of felt that things would probably break generally this way, but the election for the House of Delegates in Virginia, every delegate was up for re-election, or every seat was up for election. And whereas the legislature in Virginia has been very sort of the margins have been razor thin over the last couple of decades, the Democrats picked up 13 seats in the House of Delegates yesterday. That is an enormous gain in an off year where usually election participation is quite low. The fact that the Democrats picked up 13 seats is quite a quite a change. And so I guess the only reason I say that is not out of any sense of advocacy or partisanship, but just the sense that to set the stage for what's happening here in Washington, that I think the Republicans who are in power in all areas of government here at the federal level are going to have to take stock of what happened yesterday and understand whether they want to keep pushing ahead at risk of something similar happening in next year's midterm elections, or whether they're going to start to potentially walk back some of the harder edged policies that they've implemented. So with that said, and I will try to monitor the chat here in case there are questions that come in. The first thing that I wanted to highlight, and there are basically three main issue areas or topical areas that I was going to cover today. The biggest, of course, being the government shutdown, which today being day 36 makes it the longest federal government shutdown in history. So we are definitely looking at a situation where something needs to happen soon. I think what I'll say first about the shutdown is that in terms of direct impact on programs, there are a couple of buckets. There are many programs that are not necessarily affected right now. Formula programs. So things like Title I aid for public schools at the K-12 schools, federal financial aid programs, and other grants that are sort of allocated to states based on formulas, excuse me, are proceeding along as of this point. Obviously, if that goes on much further and we start to, get into large amounts of money that have to be allocated, we do run the risk of that money just not even being there. Because along with that, and I'll talk about this a little more in a moment, but there have not been appropriations bills passed for the coming fiscal year. And so we don't even really have, obviously, a continuing resolution in place, otherwise the government would be open. So that there's definitely a longer term risk. Now, the programs that are being affected right now, there are some really important ones, including Impact Aid, which provides K-12 funding for federally impacted schools, things like schools that are heavily attended by children of armed forces members. So a lot of military bases around the South. A lot of those school districts that are adjacent to are associated with those military bases are not getting the money that they're supposed to through their impact aid programs. Similarly, Native and Indigenous schools are heavily subsidized by impact aid. So where there are reservations and large concentrations of Native and Indigenous students, that money is being affected. For higher education, obviously a little bit outside the admission space, but research and contracts are at a pretty much a standstill right now. Grants for research and contracts for various things, including research, but also programs that colleges may run or services for the government itself. And of course, maybe more closely associated with us is the work study programs. Funding for those is slowing down and might actually stop at some point if the government doesn't reopen soon. And then there's just the idea, along with the shutdown, that you want the federal government functioning because it does play other roles. Funding programs is a critically important role. But there are other things that the government does, and those range, and I'm definitely not going to capture all of it, but services and programs. We've tried to access census data, for instance, and can't get access to it. Some programs are up, some data programs are up, some are not. There are enforcement mechanisms that the federal government maintains. So civil rights, of course, the Trump administration isn't necessarily stopping on its civil rights activity, but it's not exactly civil rights as you and I might think of it. So, there really is there's not much functioning at all on the sort of the routine business of the federal government. So that's kind of where we are right at the moment. Now, in terms of what we're hearing on Capitol Hill, we do know that there are talks going on. Last week, I think there were some competing proposals in the Senate to make sure that federal workers get paid. The Republicans generally wanted to allow the administration to determine who gets paid. The Democrats wanted for all federal workers to get paid. And I think the big concern there, of course, was that as the administration has been doing, it is sort of picking and choosing the programs that it wants to continue, even though all of these programs have been appropriated and authorized by Congress. So I'll talk a little bit more about that because that's a compounding effect to this government shutdown. I think that to go back to yesterday's election results, the idea that people are seeing the impact of the federal shutdown, and here's where it gets real for a lot of people, which is that federal workers just aren't getting paid. And to go outside a little bit of well, not a little bit, a lot of our education space, things like air traffic controllers having to work without pay is obviously a really concerning thing. And in the Washington, D.C. area, and I can imagine in other areas too, a lot of people losing their jobs, both for the federal government and with contractors and companies and organizations that work alongside the government or for the government directly, or that that benefit from government programs. So really, the shutdown is being keenly felt and seen by a lot of people. And in fact, when I look at the map of Virginia from yesterday's election, I see that whereas Northern Virginia is always solidly blue, it is also relatively solidly geographically compact. Yesterday, though, it looked as if the blue sort of bled out into counties that have traditionally been red-ish, and that have only in really sort of dire circumstances gone blue. And you can almost sort of see the I-95 corridor going down through Virginia and then heading down towards Hampton Roads in the Virginia Beach area where there's a lot of military bases and installations. It's very clear that the number of people that are being affected by this is enormous and that it did have an effect. So moving forward, I think the Republicans who control everything here in DC are going to have to figure out, like, what is the cost of keeping this going, this shutdown going. At the moment, all I know is that there are negotiations going on. I don't know where they are. I don't know how close we are. I expect that will change after today. But with that, I think I'll just sort of stop on the government shutdown conversation. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to drop them in the chat, or anybody can flag me down and I'll stop along the way. We do anticipate, though, that there will need to be, if history is any sort of indicator, my sense is what they would do first is come up with a continuing resolution that keeps the government open while they can do more negotiations to try to figure out what the FY 2026 appropriations looks like, which technically, FY 2026 started on September 1st. And I've always maintained that, if Congress isn't passing a budget, if they're not passing their appropriations bills, that's almost as if they're not even showing up for work, because it's really the one thing that Congress is tasked with doing in the Constitution is to determine a federal budget. And so it really sort of irritates me. And I think as we look at what people can do in advocacy, I really think that, and this crosses party lines. I really think that whenever there is a federal government shutdown, that Congress has abdicated its one true responsibility. So, the idea that we would want to hold Congress accountable, um, and say that directly, that you had one job effectively, is a really powerful point to make, and something that you can't say too often. So I do see that there is a question here. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. So with the government shutdown and cancellation of critical programs, what will the future of programs such as Gear Up, TRIO, federal Pell Grants for students who are low income, vulnerable, or disabled look like? Well, that's a great question for me to transition into the next topic area that I was going to talk about. And that is kind of the compounding effect of the shutdown on what has already been happening. And so I'll give you a short answer first to this direct question. Gear Up and program and Gear Up and program, Gear Up and TRIO programs are in real trouble right now with the Trump administration, trying to shut either in the Gear Up case, shut it all down. In TRIO's case, shut down programs that the administration thinks are objectionable for one reason or another. And I honestly can't tell you, I can't even figure out what criteria they might be using to select. I know there's been words thrown around in the media to describe what they're trying to do, but it really doesn't make any sense. Um, Pell Grants tend to have more broad-based bipartisan support, so I think Pell Grants are safer than Gear Up and TRIO. And I think across the board, in terms of the populations that the federal programs tend to serve, the administration has just been flat out calling them Democrat programs, which don't get me started on the Republicans sort of trying to demean the Democratic Party by calling them the Democrat Party. It's one of the pettiest things you can do. But in doing so, they really are trying to demean and debase the programs that help a lot of people, and not necessarily people who fall into one specific category of geographically, demographically, or anything. Um, so I do think these populations are at a significant degree of risk, with again the caveat that yesterday's election is likely to have an effect on that dynamic. So let me go into the longer answer here. I'm going to share my screen. Allow only one presenter can share at a time. I'm going to go ahead and allow that. I'm just using my authority as co-host with abandon, if that's okay. um, Let me find the little slideshow thingy here. Here we go. So this was there we go. Let me know if you can't see that. But this was a slide presentation that the Senate on Budget and Policy Priorities gave at the sort of the overall coalition that we belong to in DC, called the Committee for Education Funding, where really all education associations, no matter who they represent, belong to. Whoops, I did the wrong thing here. Okay. So I'm going to breeze through this. This is a very, very dense PowerPoint. So let me just kind of breeze through it. So what I love the term that they say here: governance in a time of corrosive uncertainty. And these are the compounding things that I mentioned earlier: rescissions, impoundments, reductions in force. All of that is happening on top of this government shutdown, and was happening even before the government shutdown. So basically what the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities did was that they went through and kind of helped us understand like what is going on, what the effects might be if not reversed, and maybe how we can kind of go about pushing back. The Let's see, on this slide, I'll just call attention to the three things here that they've highlighted: the illegal funding freezes. So you all know the administration has taken almost a willy-nilly approach to freezing money from colleges, including Harvard and many others, specific programs, whole programs, and even parts of programs. And when this slide says illegal funding freezes, what we're getting at here is that the administration has essentially unilaterally declared certain things to be illegal. DEI is a great example. There is nothing in federal law that says DEI is illegal, yet this administration has consistently, since day one, said that it was illegal. And they have used that basis, that false construct, to go through and weed out programs, grantees, in schools and institutions, organizations that receive federal money. And that is a number of lower courts, so federal courts, but lower than the Supreme Court, have ruled that this is an illegal process, given the fact that Congress has already appropriated this money. And in many cases, some of the money has been appropriated, but they've frozen parts of the money that institutions are not getting, or organizations. The fast track rescissions, where the president and Congress have essentially eliminated funding that had already been approved, using a fast track process that is a simple majority process. Again, when Congress appropriates money, that is law. So to go back and then, what you've done is, in addition to creating essentially a legal sort of funding stream, many agencies have already started to notify institutions and other entities of federal awards under these programs. So when you go back and say, whoops, no, we're just kidding, the program's gone, you leave a lot of people in the lurch. And there is a vigorous debate about whether these fast track rescissions are constitutional. So that's, again, subject to legal dispute. And then the last piece was the illegal unilateral rescissions. So this is where TRIO kind of comes in. Like, this money's been appropriated. This money, these grantees have been notified that they're getting TRIO money. Using the principle that I mentioned in that first case, where the administration has said something like DEI is illegal, they then, on that basis, go back and just yank money back and say, no, you don't actually get that money because you're doing something we don't agree with. And it is a very long-held legal principle that policy differences, policy priorities of an administration do not equal legal or illegal status in the federal government. Congress has passed no laws that say something like DEI is illegal. Just because the administration wants it to be that way doesn't mean they can go and enforce it in this fashion. So once again, using the TRIO grants as an example, there are already lawsuits about that. And it is obviously, the basis for these suits ranges from the individual harm that these students and programs are suffering, all the way to sort of the foundational constitutional principles of, you can't unilaterally declare an activity illegal. So, and this red text at the bottom is really kind of the crux of the issue, which is that lawmakers can't make a deal if one side refuses to honor it. So this is contributing, and I'll go to the next slide here. Actually, this slide essentially just shows sort of the percentage of funds that are allocated in 2024 and 2025. In terms of the programs that you see on the right. So as you can see in 2024, if you look at the graph, you see the blue line, there's almost 100% of the money has been appropriated. You look at that chart next to the graph, where you can see the very large amounts of money, which are very close to the appropriated amounts that were given out. In 2025, the black line on the chart, you can see less than 20% of funds that were obligated for FY 2025 have been doled out, again, of programs in this chart on the right. And you can just see how many programs have zeros next to them. And then the federal TRIO programs, for instance, $1.1 billion was appropriated and given out in 2024, 467 million at the same time in 2025. So only a fraction, less than half of the funding that was appropriated has been allocated. So what this really is it is and this, again, text heavy slide, I apologize. This is not my style, also not my slides. The idea that the administration is systematically dismantling, essentially cutting off at the knees, federal agencies, and then what they call a sludge, which is just reducing the bureaucratic process to almost grinding it to a halt, um, is even if we were to resolve the government shutdown today or tomorrow, we would still have to come back and deal with this. So that's very concerning from our front, because this administration and Congress, by its own tacit approval, has been operating in an extra legal fashion. So I think what's going to have to happen, and I'm going to skip these slides because this is a lot of text. Um, so I'll just go ahead and exit out of there and stop sharing. Whoops. I have to go up here. Sorry. I'm operating off of two screens, so pardon me for looking back and forth here. Okay. So we're dealing with, I mean, for instance, in the Department of Education, we're dealing with offices that have only a handful of staffers left in them. The Institute for Education Sciences, which runs all the federal data programs, has, I think, 3 people. And they used to occupy most of a building downtown. So it's right now we're looking at just essentially a train wreck of the highest order. And so where I think we're going to be, you saw a slide there that I actually just breezed, that I didn't even stop on, but which was sort of like what's happening now and then what we can expect for the future. Um, there are a couple, you could easily say, and I'd say maybe there's a 50-50 chance of this, that we're just going to get more of the same, that it's just going to continue to be this slog, and that federal money is just going to continue to grind to a halt if it's continued at all. Um, Congress will eventually have to pass these appropriations bills, so something's going to get passed. But the pattern that this administration has been using, and again, with Congress's approval, is that Congress will pass the appropriations bill, and then in, again, an extra legal fashion, that the administration will go through and figure out what it actually wants to spend of the appropriated money. And that's not how it works. When Congress appropriates money, the administration's job is to give it out, is to actually get the money to where it's supposed to go. That's a legal constitutional framework that we have to work within. Um, so there's a pretty good chance that that could continue. The two things, though, that I think make it only a 50-50 proposition and not better than that is that, as I mentioned earlier, literally every what I would consider extra legal move that the administration has made on these budget issues is subject to a court dispute. And overwhelmingly, when they've ruled on the merits, the courts have found in favor of the plaintiffs and not the administration, because these are extra legal moves. Again, in my opinion, and I'll say that courts don't love extra legal things, and it's really showing up in the decisions that they've made. Art Coleman, who you've probably seen or heard from in the context of NACAC advocacy, is having a great time when he's not overwhelmed, which is very, very infrequently now. He's having a great time reading these decisions and reading the kinds of harsh language, and colorful language that the judges are using to describe just how appalled they are at the administration's sort of contortions and violations of our legal principles. So I think that the hammer is going to fall on that fairly soon. The Supreme Court, I know not a lot of people have faith that the court exercises a great deal of independence from the ideological agenda that is currently sort of in power. But given what the lower courts have said, and the unanimity of opinion in the lower courts, it's going to be very hard, in my opinion, for the Supreme Court to essentially rubber stamp what the administration is doing right now, and maintain any degree of legitimacy. So the last thing that I'll say about all that's happening around the government outside of the shutdown is that, again, yesterday's election results, I think, send a pretty clear signal to the Republicans that there is a cost to this kind of activity. Is it the case that they're going to be willing to pay that price just to dismantle the federal Department of Education, among many other agencies and efforts that they're trying to dismantle? Or is it going to be the case that members of Congress start to see that their political survival depends on a more balanced approach. Um, Again, I don't know. We're not dealing with norms that any of us are accustomed to right now. So I don't know if that's going to have the same effect on members of Congress. But I think particularly with California's Prop 50 approval, with the possibility that Virginia may do something very similar in the legislature, which is now again overwhelmingly blue, at least in the House of Delegates, that has a Democratic governor, that the risk factor for the Republicans gets a lot higher. So I'm going to pause there. If anybody has questions to put into the chat, I'm happy to respond to them. Um, or Rose, is there anything that you wanted to ask me before I go into the very last piece of this, which will only take a few more minutes, so we can do a little Q&A and have you do your slides as well?
Thank you so much, David. So I think you did a wonderful overview of just what we're seeing on the landscape and from that higher level. And that's exactly what we're here for, to get your insight and how we can help. And from a government relations perspective, there'll be lots of involvements that I'll talk about, and how you can have a local impact and share your personal stories of what you're seeing with your students and members. Just so that we can make sure that everyone here is familiar or more aware of, can you discuss a little bit more about the impact that students are having on international applicants and the Compact for Academic Excellence? I think those are two larger broad laws that I think are affecting many institutions and schools in our area.
Absolutely, Rose. And I'll tell you, this was my last it's a sad comment when your last bucket is everything else, right? So, so we have an administration that is first of all, that is making it quite inhospitable through visa changes, through H-1B visa proposed changes, through just the rhetoric of the administration and sort of mood in the country. International recruitment is suffering. International students don't feel as safe coming to the U.S. The latest IIE report showed that international student enrollment is declining, and that has potentially billions of dollars of impact on not just our institutions, but the communities that these students live and thrive in and come and engage in when they're here. So we've obviously been very concerned, and I'll pop this site up really quickly. You guys might be well familiar with it, but on our advocacy page, let me see where I am here. Okay, there we go. Let me just throw this up really quickly. This is our advocacy page, and you can see everything that we've done here under the NACAC Takes Action section. There's some areas where you can take action, of course. But for instance, here's a good example. We signed on to a community effort requesting relief for colleges and universities from the new H-1B visa requirement. I mean, this is just, this is not tenable. This will make it all but impossible for colleges to afford to enroll international students, which, in addition to the obvious cultural and educational benefits of having a multinational, a global sort of approach to education, international students contribute financially to our institutions. And if you take that away, well, absent of a significant investment of public dollars into higher education, a lot of our colleges aren't going to make it out of this administration. And that's something that is of great concern, and that is quite unifying when it comes to the higher education community. A couple of other issues, Rose, that we've been dealing with. Of course, this proposed iPads collection, which roughly translates to we want sort of Big Brother in your admissions process to make sure you're not admitting too many Black or brown students. We are vehemently opposed to that. And we did send comments. We're waiting on that to see what the administration ends up doing. There was recently a new rule passed about public service loan forgiveness. The vast majority of people are still eligible for PSLF, as we call it. But the regulation sets a dangerous precedent, because they, again, in this extra legal fashion, they're saying that employees of organizations that conduct illegal activities, and they define illegal activities, as examples, they use gender affirming care. There's nothing illegal about gender affirming care at this point. There's nothing illegal about DEI practices. So it is a gaping hole in PSLF that can be used to essentially tell any organization that their employees can't be eligible for this, even though they meet all the other criteria in the statute. Lawsuits coming on that too. The academic compact, Rose, that you mentioned. Um, one of the most odious and extensive federal overreaches that I've ever seen, wanting institutions to essentially kowtow to the administration's agenda in exchange for federal money and the sort of the open spigot of federal financial aid for students. I don't even, we don't have enough time this year for me to go through all the reasons why that's objectionable, but to kind of hold students over a barrel and hold institutions similarly over the same barrel to a political agenda is anathema to academic freedom. It's undemocratic in a small d sense that it goes against our First Amendment rights. And what it essentially does is it adds a video camera. Think of it like one of those little babysitting cameras that they put in the teddy bear's eye or something. You've got one of those sitting in every admission office that would sign that compact. And they would essentially be able to wander in and figure out like look at your admission records and determine by their own sort of ill-defined terms whether you've cheated in some fashion on the SFFA decision, for instance. So really, really a bad compact. And most of the institutions, I'm not going to have the specific count, but most of them, I think all but a couple, have rejected it already. We're looking at maybe one or two institutions that are considering sign it or maybe have signed it. The administration is making noises about going out to other institutions as well. But I think the fact that 8 out of the 10 or something, or 10 out of the 12 rejected it was a clear signal that, listen, this is not good. This is not something institutions ought to be accepting. It's just too much of it's selling one's soul just to continue to get federal benefits under the conditions that would almost certainly be overturned in court. So that is a big concern, obviously. And again, it's united the higher education community up here. I mean, the last thing I'll mention, and I'll stop there, is the legal battles over issues related to admission, particularly in that DEI camp. There's a lot of investigations afoot of institutions. There's the original executive orders that kind of laid down the administration's policy, and then there's the subsequent guidance from the Department of Education, which is sub-regulatory, and those lawsuits are still playing out. And just as kind of a quick refresher, the two principles that early court decisions have sort of come to on the merits of the case is that the Trump administration's actions are unconstitutional in two ways. Number one, they curb freedom of speech, that there's nothing saying that an institution can't talk about and or practice DEI. And writ large, and in the second case, that there is a Fifth Amendment violation that says when the federal government can't pass a law that is overly broad and ill-defined, because how can an entity or an individual comply with a law if they don't know what the law requires of them, or what actions specifically are illegal? So those are things that are still all up in the air. And I can say after 25 years in this, any one of those issues would have made for a very busy year here at NACAC. But now we have all of them. So not looking for sympathy, but just saying how much our work is cut out for us. And Rose, what I'll say in terms of getting involved, that NACAC page that I put up earlier, and I can link it in the chat as well. We've got a lot of ways through the advocacy toolkit, through our action alerts, through just staying sort of involved in or up to date. Sean writes a great little summary every week that gets posted out to our admitted blog that's linked on this page as well. And just repeating yourself over and over until our elected officials start to get it. So Rose, I'm going to stop there because I know we've got about 20 minutes. I want you to get through your slides, and obviously want to be able to answer any last questions that come in. So
Thank you
So
so
thank
much,
you.
David, and we appreciate all the work that you do. We know that you're supposed to be retiring. I doubt that retirement will be very near for you, but at least you are hopefully getting to rest a little bit more. So thank
Yeah.
you for taking the time to speak with us and cover really all the many different areas that we've been seeing. It's hard to keep up with. So to have your perspective when you're there and making such a an effort to be able to be consistently representing our association, representing our students and our, our professionals in our area is definitely something that we're truly thankful for. I'm just going to go ahead and take a quick look at the chat to see if anyone has posted anything there. A lot of what we're seeing too is just so much intersectionality between, different disciplines within education and other departments like the Health and Human Services, the fact that they're trying to move the Office of, deplete the Office of Civil Rights. They're moving the special education program now, trying to at least to the Health and Human Services. So a lot of the lawsuits that are happening are to be determined and do take time and will have to be played by ear and keeping a watch on what's going on. However, speaking up and showing ways that that this is something that we want to be able to continue to fight is important. So I'm just going to go ahead and share some of the ways that you can get involved with our state and area initiatives meetings that are going to be taking place in our 9 southern states. So the next one will be in South Carolina on November 7th. Members in SACAC can also attend in Louisiana on November 10th, and every single day that week following for your state initiative. So Mississippi will take their meeting will take place on November 12th. North Carolina will have one, Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida, and Georgia will be closer to the end of the month. You can look on SACAC's website for a calendar of events to be able to register for any of those dates so that you can hear not only from government relations and how we're speaking up and sharing our stories, but also learning about other ways that within SACAC you can make an impact, whether it's from an inclusion perspective, whether it's on a workshop, on a mission, whether it's helping support other counselors, etc. As well as our government relations committee, we're hosting our Voices in Action Day. So it's a day of advocacy. It can be focused. If you go to the Capitol, there's a legislative agenda that will be there that promotes NACAC policies as well as SACAC policies. Some events will be virtual. So Florida, I know they kicked off theirs first in October, and there's the reporting in our government relations folder for resources if you want to stay up to date with some updates there. Georgia will be hosting theirs in February, Alabama's in December, and Arkansas in February. So we have a few more states that are finalizing those dates with the representatives and speakers, whether it's from a virtual and in-person capacity. So I recommend you checking any of those events out as soon as the registrations are posted. So that will be out soon. And then, of course, our conference this year will be taking place in New Orleans, March 22nd to 23rd, and we'll be having a focus on the 60th anniversary since SACAC originated. And our theme this year is going to be opening doors and changing lives. And I think that's a really encompassing field, especially within government relations with the changes in legislation about how we still need to speak up and the stronger we are together, the more impact we can make. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just take a quick look to see if anyone else has anything that they'd like to have addressed. I know this is your lunchtime, so thank you again for everyone that was able to join and hop in today on this session. Our government relations committee team, Anna and I are also sending newsletters every month, and we do mirror a lot of what our Director of Advocacy, Sean Robbins, and David and his team at NACAC share. The issue briefs, the op-ed letters, the knitted blogs, those are great ways to either take an action, complete an action alert to send to your representative, to be able to post a public commentary for the PSL loan, for example, that David mentioned earlier. There are different ways that you can document as well as join other organizations together to speak up against some of these issues that are affecting our association. So please continue to keep an eye out on those resources. And David, thank you again for the time that you spent with us today. If there's anything else you want to share, feel free.
I want to say, first and foremost, thank you all for being engaged in advocacy. It is, it is work outside of your job, but I'll tell you what, it is so important, and your stories and your expertise are really what our policymakers need to hear. So thank you all for doing what you're doing. And if I can be of any help to you in my last couple of months here at NACAC, I will. And of course, you'll all know where to find me after on LinkedIn and other places. So I'm always happy to be of help. And Rose, thank you particularly for what you and your colleagues are doing leading this effort for SACAC.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you everyone for joining today. We look forward to working with you in the upcoming year and have a great afternoon, everyone. Stay safe. Thanks.